On a quiet autumn morning, as the sun rose lazily over the mountains, the small town lay wrapped in a hush of golden mist. The streets were nearly empty, lined with wooden porches and houses that spoke of age, survival, and families that had endured much. At the edge of this town, beside a rundown church whose steeple pointed faithfully toward the sky, a little girl stood holding a small basket of flowers. Her name was Clara, and she was no older than 7, her hair in 2 uneven braids that bounced each time she shifted nervously on her feet. She was waiting for someone who would never come, her mother. Just weeks before, Clara had lost her to an illness that spread too fast for doctors to fight. Since then, the girl's world had been split open, her father consumed with work in the fields, leaving Clara often to herself. She had begun to wander the town with eyes that seemed too deep for her age, looking for something or someone that could fill the empty space her mother's absence left behind. That morning, Clara noticed a figure curled up against the church wall, wrapped in a blanket made of stitched animal skins. At first she thought it was just a pile of rags, but when the figure stirred and lifted her head, Clara froze. It was a woman, skin weathered by sun and wind, her dark hair streaked with silver, her eyes a haunting reflection of the wild. She was Apache, and clearly without a home. The townspeople had seen her before, drifting along the edges of the settlement, taking what little food was thrown her way, speaking little. Most whispered behind her back, calling her names, doubting her character, refusing to trust someone with no roots in their soil. Clara, however, saw something different. The woman's eyes, though heavy with exhaustion, carried a sadness that mirrored her own. And that was enough to make Clara step closer. "You don't have a house," Clara said softly, clutching the basket tighter. The woman looked at her, surprised that such a tiny voice dared to speak. Before the woman could respond, Clara added, her voice trembling but sincere, "And I don't have a mama." The words fell into the morning air like a fragile secret, and for a long moment, neither moved. The woman blinked, her lips parting as though to speak, but nothing came. Clara tilted her head, her eyes glistening. "Maybe we can help each other." That was the beginning. A child with no mother and a woman with no home, standing together in the golden hush of morning, as if fate had stitched their broken pieces side by side. The woman's name, Clara would later learn, was Ayana, meaning eternal blossom. She had once belonged to a proud tribe in the high desert, but after raids, loss, and betrayal, she had wandered alone, carrying only the weight of memory and survival. She did not ask for pity, nor did she offer smiles easily, but Clara's words touched something deep within her. The part of her that still longed for connection, for belonging. At first, Ayana resisted. "I am not your mama," she said gruffly, her voice thick from disuse. "And I cannot give you what you have lost." But Clara only shook her head with stubborn innocence. "I don't need you to be my mama. I just need someone to stay, someone who won't leave." The child's honesty left Ayana speechless. No one in the town had ever spoken to her without suspicion, without judgment. Yet here was this little girl, extending her heart like an open door. Against her instincts, Ayana allowed Clara to sit beside her, to share bread from her basket, to talk about her mother, her father, her fears, and her dreams. The woman listened in silence, her guarded expression softening bit by bit, like snow melting under sunlight. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's visits became routine. Sometimes she would bring food from her father's kitchen, other times a blanket or small flowers she picked along the path. She would chatter endlessly, filling the silence that Ayana once wore like armor. Slowly, the Apache woman found herself speaking back, small words at first, then stories from her tribe, tales of rivers, mountains, and skies that stretched forever. Clara drank in every word, her eyes wide with wonder, as though Ayana's voice was weaving her a new kind of lullaby. But not everyone approved. The townsfolk began to notice the bond between the little girl and the homeless Apache. Whispers grew louder. "That child shouldn't be with her," one woman muttered at the market. "It's dangerous," said another. Clara's father, weary from his grief and work, grew concerned. "Clara," he warned one evening, "you mustn't spend so much time with her. She doesn't belong here. People will talk." Clara's little fists clenched at her sides. "But she listens to me, Papa. She cares. You don't see it, but I do. She's not dangerous. She's like me. She's lost. Her father sighed, torn between fear and the strange comfort he saw in his daughter's glowing eyes whenever she returned from the church steps. He did not forbid her, but his silence carried worry heavy enough for Clara to notice. One evening, as the first snow of winter began to fall, Clara rushed to the church with her small blanket, only to find Ayanna shivering, her lips pale, her body weakened from cold and hunger. Clara panicked, pressing the blanket around her shoulders. "You can't stay out here anymore," she pleaded, tears spilling. "You'll die." Ayanna looked at the child's desperate face and felt a sting in her heart. For years, she had convinced herself she needed nothing, that home was a memory and belonging a weakness. But here, in the arms of a little girl, she realized she wanted to live. Not for herself, but for the bond they had forged. When Clara's father found them that night, he stood frozen in the falling snow, watching his daughter cradling the weary Apache as if she were family. Something in the sight broke through his hardened grief. He saw in Ayanna not a stranger, but a reflection of his own pain, a soul weathered by loss, still clinging to survival. With a heavy breath, he stepped forward and extended his hand. "Come," he said quietly. "You'll stay with us tonight." It was not easy. The townspeople frowned, whispered sharper words, and some even turned cold toward Clara's family. But as the months passed, they could not deny what they saw. Ayanna began helping in the fields, her strength and knowledge of the land breathing new life into the farm. She taught Clara songs of the earth, the meanings of the stars, the wisdom of patience and courage. And in return, Clara gave Ayanna something she had thought forever lost, a family. One spring morning, as blossoms unfolded across the valley, Clara ran to Ayanna with a flower crown she had made herself. Placing it on her head, she whispered, "You may not be my mama, but in my heart, you are." Ayanna's eyes filled with tears she had not shed in years. She pulled Clara into her arms and held her as though anchoring herself to the world. The act of compassion, a child's innocent declaration, "You don't have a house, and I don't have a mama," had grown into something that neither could have imagined. It was no longer about filling emptiness, but about building something new from brokenness. Ayanna was no longer homeless, for she had found a place in their hearts. And Clara, though she still missed her mother every day, had discovered that love could bloom again in unexpected ways. The townsfolk, little by little, softened too. Seeing Ayanna's devotion, her quiet strength, and the way she cared for Clara as if she were her own, they began to set aside their prejudice. Some offered her work, others greeted her with nods instead of suspicion. It was not a perfect acceptance, but it was a start. Years later, Clara would look back on that morning by the church when she first spoke those words. She would remember how fragile and scared she had been, and how brave it felt to reach out to someone the world had cast aside. And she would smile, knowing that one act of kindness, one moment of daring to see with the heart instead of the eyes, had changed both their lives forever. Because sometimes, home is not made of walls or roofs, and a mother is not always the one who gave you life. Sometimes, home is found in the arms of someone who chooses to stay, and a mother is the one who chooses to love. And so, in the heart of a little town once divided by suspicion, an orphan girl and a homeless Apache woman proved that compassion has the power to heal, to bridge divides, and to remind the world that even in loss, love can be found again. Unexpected, unbreakable, eternal.